Joining me now is President of San Diego Log Cabin Republicans and transgendered female, Gina Roberts. Gina, thanks for being here.
Great, thank you.
All right, Gina, let me ask you, you're part of Log Cabin Republicans, you're a transgendered female yourself. What do you make of President Trump's directive rolling back the Obama administration directive on transgender bathroom access?
Well, it's interesting. You know, everybody says they rolled it completely back, and actually what they basically said was that this was a really poorly written document, which we've kind of pointed out to them, and that they've actually said they want time to study it, and what they're going to do is allow some of these court cases to go through, because the biggest part of that, the problem with that executive order was the fact that it's generated like 15 court cases, so it's very ambiguous and very heavy-handed in my opinion.
Right. Right, no, that makes sense to me, and I guess because that seems common sense to me, let me ask you, why is there such a chorus, in your opinion, of anti-LGBTQ accusations against President Trump, against the Trump administration, when, I mean, in all practicality, this seems to me just letting it go back to the states where social issues were supposed to be resolved anyway?
Well, we can take a little bit of a different direction on that. We do believe that the transgender bathroom issue is a civil rights issue and should probably stay at the federal level. But the interesting thing is that nobody really read the memo. And I love to look at my LGBT friends and say that, and say, did you really read this? Because it wasn't just yanking those away. In fact, the last paragraph of the memo says, we really need to make sure that LGBT kids are still given a safe environment to go to school in.
Right.
Paraphrased, but...
Right, and I think that's something that President Trump made very clear when he did roll back, for lack of a better term, roll back this directive. He said, you know, schools are obligated to make sure that all students, regardless of how they identify, regardless of their sexual orientation, that they have a safe space to use the bathroom. I mean, it should go without saying, to be honest. But Gina, let me ask you about something. You mentioned that you view this as a civil rights issue, and I want to ask you about one of the main criticisms of the gender-neutral bathrooms, or bathrooms based off of gender identity versus birth gender, and that, of course, is, and we've seen this happen in the last year or so, that is the sexual predators who disguise themselves as transgendered people. Not actual transgendered people, but sexual predators who use that as an excuse to prey on, many times on children, but on women too. How do you address that?
Well, basically, if they're going into the restroom to do that, first of all, they're already breaking a handful of laws. They're just kind of trying to hide behind something to try to get away with going into a bathroom and doing something strange. I've been using, you know, the correct bathroom for my gender for 35 years and have never had an issue. But the whole concept, the requirement that, you know, well, for schools, let's just talk about schools, because that's
Sure.
where the big deal is. Part of the problem was with the Obama directive was that there was no clear delineation of how these transgendered kids to use these restrooms need to be identified and
Right.
need to stand out. And like some of the local school districts in our town, like I live in Valley Center, which is probably the most conservative rural area in San Diego, we have a great program for dealing with transgendered children.
Right, and I think that's one of the criticisms about it being handled at the federal level, because there isn't a federal unified understanding or definition of what constitutes a, you know, gender identity or transgender kid. It is so fluid, so people say, well, if it's fluid, then we'll leave it to the school districts or the communities or the individual schools to deal with that. Gina, let me pivot to a slightly different issue. This is still school related, but we read a story, you know, we heard about this story this week. A transgender wrestler named Mac Beggs identifies as a male. He just won the Texas State Girls Wrestling Championship, though. Of course, this was rife with controversy because, I mean, even pictures of him, you can see, you know, how muscular, how different he looks than his female competition here. And I wanted to know what you made of that, because he identifies as a male. And to respect that gender identity, you would think, okay, well, he would compete with other men then, but he's not. He's competing with the girls.
Well, not at his choice. His choice was either compete with the girls or don't compete. So he chose to go ahead and compete with the girls, which he did not feel was not what he wanted to do. He would rather have competed with the males. But due to the, I think it's the UIL law in Texas, they, required that whatever he was born with at his birth, they used that to classify him, and it was really silly. It's kind of backfired, and from what I understand, there's a lot of rhetoric going on now about let's revisit that. 'Cause
Right,
that
it
really
is.
didn't
It is
work for
actually,
us.
it's almost ironic. The word you used is perfect. It did backfire because they have that regulation that says your birth gender is the gender that you must compete, but now they're upset because someone who has taken testosterone shots and been ongoing in his transition for the past 2 years is competing in the girls even though he identifies as a guy. My problem with this, I guess, is that the standards, it does make it quite unfair for the other girls in this competition, because if they had taken testosterone shots to the level that Mac Beggs did, they'd be accused of doping.
Right. Well, and back to the original thing. He didn't want to compete with the girls. He wanted to compete with the boys, and he may have been at a slight disadvantage with the males because he hasn't had that benefit all of his life. You know, there's even the International Olympic Committee and everybody have dealt with this issue in some
Right.
very, very interesting ways. And myself, I compete all the time now in women's shooting events. And I'll give you a hint. Those hormones do amazing things to change your body, you know, tone and things. So.
Right, right. My main concern, I guess, with just specific to the wrestling issue here is that if they change the regulations from birth gender to gender identity, I could see some guys who maybe don't have the best character pretending they're girls just because they want to win the championship. Not even a gender identity issue. It's very messy. Gina, one last question that I want to ask you. As a conservative transgendered person, do identity politics, I mean, do you get stereotyped based off of your gender identity, based off of your sexuality, based off of the fact that you're part of log cabin Republicans? Does that follow you?
Well, actually, in the Republican Party and the other conservative circles I run in, I seem to do very well. I tend to share a lot of the correct, you know, the ideals of the conservative world and the Republican Party. I'm a committee member for the local party, and I was actually the first transgender GOP delegate in Sacramento. Everybody thinks, and I'm not claiming that for sure, but I was definitely the only one there this year. So I think that the identity politics with me has gone very well. I get along with a lot of people, and I try to put a face on something that a lot of maybe very conservative people have not ever had the experience with, and if they have a positive experience with me, sometimes it seems to help shape a better relationship.
Well, Gina, we really appreciate you coming on the show today. It was great to talk to you.
Pleasure.